Okay, let's go.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new to the channel, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. Make sure you hit that notification bell to all so you'll be notified of all the new content that I'm pushing. And with that, I want to thank everybody for their support. Us small YouTubers that are starting out, one thing that I've found talking with the bigger YouTube channels, bigger platforms, is they're always at each other, and there's always some type of beef going on. But I learned with several other little smaller channels that are starting out, like myself, and there are several others, that we're like a family. We help each other, and we don't rag on each other, and we don't try to put each other down, and we help each other and help each other grow. And I love that about the fact that we have that bond that those bigger platforms don't have. They only hang, with the elite people. They only want to talk to people that are at their level or above, or they think they're at this elite level, but they're always beefing with each other, and it's just drama all the time. With us smaller channels that are growing, we don't have that drama. We don't have any of that stuff. We speak the truth. We tell our stories. We tell facts, where they're running out of things to talk about, so they have to go react to some other big guys or YouTube channel and put them down or start a beef with them and ride their coattails to get views or get things like that. And we don't have to do that. I like being the smaller channel. Of course, I want to grow eventually and get bigger, but these are new stories. They run out of stories. They ran out of stories. And, and if they sat there and told all their stories, let's just say they did 20 years in prison. You could sit there literally, what led up to you going to prison, your first day, your first week, every single day you were in prison. You could have your YouTube channel. You could have a story every day for the next 20 years, you know what I mean, that they did. But they don't do that. I don't understand it. But anyways, I just wanted to shout out to all the smaller YouTube channels, and I like the fact that we're all, we don't troll, we don't have trolls, we don't troll each other, or we have respect for each other. Unlike these big channels, they're all about money. All they want is the money, the bag. We're not like that. We're here to share our stories and get together, and help people out. And that's what the goal is. Anyways, so this story that I have for you tonight, like, I totally had forgotten about it for the longest time. And then it just, boom, popped up in my head. And I was like, oh, you know what? And then I started. It took me a couple days, because we're talking 40 years ago this happened, okay? It started 40 years ago. And then, what was it? 14 years later, I think it was, the story resurfaced. And so, yeah, it's a little bit wild for me, and it's a little bit wild, and I hope you enjoy it. So I'm going to share this with you. And my stories, I know a lot of people want to talk about, there's no way you were a PO, or you were this, or you were that, or, yeah, well, I have everything to back everything up that I say. Everything that I tell you is 100% truth and facts. I have no reason. Why do I have a reason to lie? I'm not making money off of this. I'm not out for the money. So I'm telling you facts and truth. So all these stories that, I put out are my own personal stories, whether it be something in my job or my own just personal experience. Like the last one I did with my cousin, which, you know, it was a messed up situation. And, you know, I can't, you know, I forgive my cousin, but you know, what he did, it really messed me up because, you know, growing up with your cousin and being close and having something like that. But that's what addiction, and we all talk about that. We all have our own issues, you know, whether it be addiction, family matters, legal matters, mental health issues, whatever it is, we're sharing it. So this story, like I said, I had been thinking, it just popped up one day and I'm like, oh yeah, you know what? I totally forgot about that. That's a good story. But I couldn't remember a lot of it because it was 40 years ago. And so I started, you know, I remembered like what happened to my knowledge, but I said, you know, I'm going to do some research on it before I share my story with everybody. And so there's several, I guess it was on several shows, like, you know, these crime documentary shows. And then some people did their own stories on it on YouTube years ago. And they all weren't the same. You know what I mean? Some of them were the same. Some of them were a little bit different. Things changed in different things. But I'm going to tell you my own experience and what I know. And I'm not saying anything about their stories aren't true, because I'm just going to tell you what I experienced. And then I'm going to show you a clip, because out of all the TV and different places I found the story, I'm going to show you the one that was realist to me, and it was, you know what I mean, and how it became to me. So let's get into it. So back in when I was a teenager, okay, I was 15 years old, and we're talking the early to mid 80s. My uncle, my cousin, the one that was in the last video, his dad, my cousin had a motorcycle, and I used to be into motorcycles too, but I was into, like, you know, dirt bikes and stuff like that. And my cousin was, like I told you, a few years older than me. He was, I don't know, 3 or 4 years older than me, I think. And he had a street bike, and that he no longer used because he got another bike and the car or whatever. But for whatever reason, my uncle wanted to get rid of that bike and all the parts and everything. And so my uncle asked me, do I want this motorcycle? And I'm like, yeah, sure. You know what I mean? I think I was 14 when he gave it to me, and then I was turning 15. So, you know, I knew how to work on little stuff, and I have 2 older brothers, so they were always working on their cars, you know, so I was mechanically inclined, but I'd never, like, tore an engine down or did anything near that. So he gives me this Honda, I think it was a Honda 360, and my cousin had, like, put a different front end on it, a newer one that had disc brakes, because, you know, that year, you know, there was drum front brakes. Because we're talking 70s bike. And then he had done some different stuff too. It was a cool bike, but it didn't run. But my uncle gave me that bike plus another whole bike and a whole, like 3 or 4 boxes of parts, so that I could, like, pick parts if I needed it. And the kick-starting rod was snapped off of it, and it had a starter, electric starter, but I knew nothing about that, as you know, at that age, you know, how that stuff worked. But it didn't work. That's all I know. So, like, I worked on it and on this motorcycle, and my driveway was a slope, so it sloped down like this. So I'd take it from the garage, and me and my friends would push it, and then I'd jump on it, you know what I mean, and then push start it after trying to get it running. And I had to clean the carbs out and do some different things to it to even get to that point. And then I decided, well, hey, I'm going to pull it apart, put that kickstarting rod so I can kickstart it. Again, not knowing anything about the whole starter situation back then, that it had a electronic starter, and I didn't have the money at that point, because I was doing my other thing, and I didn't want to spend the money. I had all these other spare parts, and I was okay with that, just the way it was. I'd push start it everywhere. I didn't care, but I thought, you know what, I'm going to take the motor out. And I'm going to try to learn how to do this. And I had my friends helping me too. And my brother. And I ended up getting the new kickstarting rod, put the one that out of another engine, put in there. And it worked. So I have this street bike that I'm riding around when I was like 14, almost 15, I think. And then, I believe by then I probably turned 15. I don't remember. But back then you could drive a car. I was driving at 14. Motorcycles, street bikes, it wasn't like it is today. The cops ain't all over your ass. You know what I mean? So anyways, I got my bike running. Well, there was a new kid at school, at the high school that I had met, and he was new to the school or new to the area. And he lived like one street over from my cousin. And my cousin lived on Pueblo Drive. And he lived on Navajo Drive, one street over behind the Alpha Beta shopping center in Salinas, North Salinas, California. It was in Salinas, but it's just the north side. But anyways, I met Chris. His name was Chris, and I met him, and he when he was new, and he wasn't from the area. And his mom lived there, and his mom and dad had gotten divorced. So he had moved in he was living with his dad. And then for whatever reason, like I said, it's 40 years ago. I don't know. I don't remember. For whatever reason, he decided he wanted to live with his mom and stepdad. So when I met him, he was a cool dude. He was nice. He played football. Good dude. I mean, he was solid. And he liked my motorcycle. So he would come over to my house. Like, we used to always hang out back in the 80s, 70s, 80s. You always had your garage door open, and you'd be hanging out in the garage, whether, you were smoking weed or drinking or whatever it was. You had your garage door open, your friends would stop over. And that's just the way it was back then, whoever's house, hey, I'm coming over there, or ride by, and the garage is open, because we didn't have cell phones, back then. So Chris likes my motorcycle, and he's not somebody like I hung out with all the time, because I had, my certain clique that I hung out with, and my certain, from the neighborhood. And he wasn't like across town, but like I said, that shopping center, it was down a ways. It wasn't the neighborhood, in my neighborhood. And anyways, so he would stop over there, and I'd let him ride the bike, after we became friends. He wasn't there every day. Like I said, we didn't hang out like that, but he wanted. So I told him, I said, well, you know what? I'm going to sell my motorcycle, and I'm going to buy another one, because that's just the way I was. I get tired of something and I want something else. So I was like, I'm going to sell it. I'm going to buy something else. And he wanted to buy it. And so I'm like, yeah, man. And whatever, back then shit was cheap. Like, I got it for free. But, a motorcycle like that might go for $300 or $400. You know what I mean? Just a used motor street bike. And so I don't remember what I sold it to him for, like maybe $300-$400. And he told me, he's like, man, my stepdad is a real asshole. He used to tell me about his home life. He said that his stepdad was a real asshole, and that he didn't know if his stepdad let him keep that or have that bike there. He was telling me like his home life was bad. Let's just put it that way. His home life was not the best. And because of his stepdad. He was a very controlling and abusive type person. Just from what I gathered from him, you know what I mean, what he told me. So he didn't like to go home. And I got it, you know what I mean? So, he had other friends, but, he did come over and hang out, and he wanted to buy that bike. But he didn't have all the money, and I'm like, okay, it's cool, man. And he's like, I really don't know. He's like, I think he said he had mentioned something to his stepdad or his mom. His stepdad heard and said, you're not having a motorcycle, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Okay. But he still wanted it. He's like, my stepdad ain't gonna let me have it, but I want it. And he was he made payments to me, but he's like, just a couple payments and then was paid off. And he asked me if I could keep it there at the house while I said, yeah, man, just when you get it paid off, if you need somewhere to, put it, it's cool. You could keep it here or like on the side of the garage, like we had a fence, a gate. And that way you could just come in and grab it, you know what I mean, whenever you want, because it's your bike now. And I gave him the pink slip to it. All good. Well, after I sold it to him, at this time, I'm 15. Like I said, it's in the mid 80s, early to mid 80s. And I sell it to him. He said that he was going to take the bike to a friend of his closer to his house. I'm like, all right, cool, whatever. And I saw him for maybe about a week. Maybe a week or so after he took the bike. Maybe a week. And then I didn't see him no more. And then I got kicked out of school, out of the high school, and out of the district, actually. And then I had to go to a continuation school. And then at the continuation school, I got kicked out of there. Well, that's a long story, but that's part of my life story. But anyway, so I didn't really get to see him because I started working. By the time I was, 60, like as soon as I got kicked out of school, the continuation school, I was working a job when I was going to continuation. She only went to school a half a day, like 8:15 to 11:15. You're off, you're out, and then they had people that came in and went to school from like 11:30 to 2:30 or whatever it was. I don't know. I went in the mornings, and then I was working a job. But then when I got kicked out of there, I started working construction with my cousin. What I talked about in my other video. Start out flooring, and then I went to everywhere he went, I went. He'd be like, hey, I'm leaving here, going to work for my buddy doing construction. I'm like, okay. So I'm working construction. I never saw Chris again. Now, one of our mutual friends, and I think even the school might have done it, but I wasn't going to school there anymore. So I think the school might have done it. I saw some flyers, and the flyers were, had a picture of Chris that he was missing. But one of my friends had told me about it. And I'm like, man, that's crazy, dude. I wonder what happened. But he had talked about running away from home. Like he was going to leave. And I don't know, go back to his dad's, his biological dad, or where he was going to go. But he said he was going to leave. Or he wanted to leave. He didn't say he was going to leave. He said he wanted to leave. And so my buddy tells me about the missing posters, and I see the missing posters, and I start seeing them everywhere. I'm like, man, that's crazy, dude. He just went missing. You know what I mean? And I said, he bought my motorcycle. I wonder if he took the motorcycle and just bounced and took off. And I know he had a girlfriend at the time. He played football when I was in school. Like I said, he was like a year older than me, but he played football for the high school and North Salinas High. And He had a girlfriend. But again, like I said, I never seen, heard nothing about it because I wasn't going to school no more. So the only people I really knew or associated with was all my friends in the neighborhood and, you know, things like that. So we're talking the mid 80s, right? Again, after that, nothing. So at 18, you know, I got in trouble when I was a juvenile, and then I got in trouble when I was an adult, you know, doing stupid shit, and then I ended up getting locked up for 2 years. So I get out, and it was like the end of 1990. It was right before Thanksgiving or after Thanksgiving, one of the two. I get out. And when I got out, I went to my buddy's house who had all my stuff. And I was just like, dude, you can have everything, man. I had my mindset. So what had happened was I had a warrant. And so I didn't get released like I was supposed to. They came and picked me and another guy up, sent us to the Monterey County Jail because he had a warrant too. And then I had to go to court. The judge gave me 2 weeks, 2 week stay, and then I had to turn myself in for 6 months to do 6 months in the county. I wasn't trying to do no more time, man. I was done. And so I got out for that 2 weeks, went to my buddy's house, grabbed some clothes, told him keep the rest, get rid of it. I don't care. I'm out of here. And I bounced. Got on a Greyhound bus, went to my mom's. My mom had moved up on the other side of Sacramento in Yuba City. I went and visited her, stayed up there for like almost 2 weeks because it was like 3 days before I was supposed to go back to the Monterey County. And then I split and I went to Ohio where my dad lived. Even though my dad was he was an asshole, man. He was mean and friggin' strict, but I knew that I needed to change my life, and that's what I planned on doing. So I bounce out, I go to Ohio. Like I said, I met my first wife. Within 6 months, we're married. She had a 6-month-old daughter whose dad was not in the picture, so I raised her and had the family. And then, we had a daughter, another daughter, and then so I have a family. I'm working. Everything's good. Well, it was around 1998 that I'm at work, and at this point in time, whoops, sorry, man, I lost you guys there. I was working in corrections, and so I'm on my shift, and they call me up on the, I don't know, I think on the radio, and said, "Hey, man, you got a phone call," and I was like, "Okay." So I go to the office, get the phone call. It was my mom. And now at this point, we're talking 8 years later after I moved to Ohio. Okay. So it's been 8 years. Had been, a minute. My mom calls me. She's living in Hawaii now. She had moved to Hawaii. She calls me up and says, "Hey, a detective just called from Salinas Police Department. He wants to talk to you." I go, "About what?" And she goes, he wouldn't tell me. He didn't say, but he gave me his name and number. Wants you to call him. I'm like, okay. And I took it down. And my mom was really good. Rest in peace to my mom. She passed. She was my rock, dude. She always stood by me. She always never judged, or she never judged me. She always, was there for me no matter what. No matter what screw up I did, you know what I mean? She was always there for me. So, like, she didn't give him any information about anything. But my dad, on the other hand, so I get off the phone with my mom. They call me again. Hey, you got a call. And so it's my dad. He's like, hey, a detective from Salinas just called, and he wants to talk to you. I said, okay, yeah, mom just called me and told me, and he's like, yeah, I gave him your work number. I'm like, are you serious, Dad? And my dad's one of those people. My dad's a hard ass dude. He always was, dude. And he had been in trouble when he was younger, but he's one of them type people that, like, whatever you do, if you do something, you own up to it. You know what I mean? That's the way he was. So he's like, look, the detective wants to talk to you. I gave him your number. You're going to handle your shit. You know what I mean? Point blank. That's the way my dad was. I'm like, damn, man. In my head, I'm thinking, what the hell is this? I haven't lived there for 8 years. The only thing I could think of was that misdemeanor that was that I was supposed to go back for in 2 weeks. But I'm like, man, they would never be chirping on a misdemeanor. You know what I mean? But I was still nervous. Like, man, maybe they are. I don't know. I just didn't know at that time. But I was, like I said, I was working in corrections at that time too. It's crazy. Excuse me. So I get off the phone with my dad, and boom, another phone call. I had to apologize to my sergeant. I'm like, listen, this is something happened. Something came up. I came up with some story, So it's the detective, right? So I get on the phone, and he's like, yeah, told my name, or asked me, is this such and such? I said, yeah. He's like, look, I need to talk to you. It's pretty serious. And I'm like, what's it about? He's like, I really can't get into it right now unless you've got time to talk. And I said, well, I'm at work, I don't have time to talk right now. And he's like, call me tomorrow, first thing tomorrow. And I'm like, well, we're 3 hours difference in the time. You know what I mean? So what time you want me to call you? He wanted me to call him like, I don't know what it was, 7 o'clock in the morning, which was it was 10 o'clock in the morning in where I was at in Ohio. So I call him up. He starts questioning me about Chris. And I was like, at first I just like, who's he talking about? I didn't remember, like at this point, it had been 13, 14 years, something like that, so I didn't remember. And I hadn't been back to Salinas. You know what I mean? I had not been back at that point. Now I did, I still had a lot of family and friends and all that stuff there. But at that point, I had never went back. So I was like, I was trying to think, and then he said, look, there, and then he tells me there was a murder. It happened it happened in 1984. It's I'm going to play the video for you guys. The one that I found, there are several of them out there, but this one was on a TV station and kind of depicts everything a little bit better. It's more to what I know about the story. All right. So he said, so I'm investigating this homicide, and that we found a body was found underneath the house, and we believe, or we found first he tells me that I found a key. There was a key to a motorcycle that I owned. And I'm like, what? Well, I had several motorcycles since then, out there in California since that bike. And I'm like, okay, which motorcycle are you talking about? I don't, I'm not getting what he said, because he's not telling me anything at that point about who it was. He was trying to just like dig for information, if I knew anything. And they didn't at this point have any like subjects or persons of interest at this particular part of the investigation. All they know is they found keys and a lighter, but the keys and my motorcycle key was on there, the keys, and it went to my bike that I had, and I was the last person to register that motorcycle, and it was still in my name, but there was no motorcycle, no bike. So he asked me if I still had the bike or what did I do with the bike, and I'm like, I sold the bike. After he told me which bike it was, because I'm like, well, what bike is it? You know what I mean? I've had several of them. And he tells me about it. It's like, it's a Honda 360 and then da-da-da-da-da. And I'm like, okay, yeah, now I remember. I sold it to Chris. And, this conversation, so we had this first conversation. This is probably the second or third conversation we had where he tells me that they identified the body as Chris's body. And I'm like, oh, wow, dude, that's crazy because, he was missing. He went missing and we all thought, I thought he ran away from home, took the motorcycle and bounced because he wasn't allowed to have it because his stepdad was a real dick and real weirdo, And I knew he had talked about his home life. I told you that, guys, earlier in the story. So he tells me about, that it was Chris and that they found him underneath the house in the crawl space of this house on Navajo Drive, which his stepdad and mom had sold and new people had moved in and lived there for a couple years. And they went in the crawl space for whatever reason and then discovered this body. And that's how that all came about. But they found the key to my motorcycle and he never registered it and they never found the motorcycle. So he was asking me a lot of questions about that. And then and once we finally got all that squared away, I said, look, buddy, you already know my background. I'm sure you already ran my criminal history, my background. You already looked me up. You already know everything, that they're, about me. And I moved here in like December of 1990. You know what I mean? So I've been here for like 8 years, and he's like, yeah, but this, but that had happened back in 84, 85, whatever it was. But I'm like, yeah, I don't, but I couldn't tell him anything because I didn't know anything other than, hey, look, he was a good dude. I knew him, I met him. He was new when he was new to, the school in the area. And I sold him a motorcycle. He would come over sometimes and hang out, ride my bike. He had a shitty home life from what he told me. And really, you know what? That's all I know. And, so that was that was a messed up situation, dude. So I'm going to play this video and let you guys watch it so you can get the gist of it. And that way you can see. And like I said, so I've told my story and that's how I was like involved, but not involved because they motorcycle key. And then they somehow found out that went to a motorcycle that I owned and it never got transferred out of my name. So why did he have my motorcycle key in his pocket? I mean, that's basically what it boiled down to when he's talking to me. And why did I have it? Where was the motorcycle? I don't know, dude. I sold it to him. He wrote it off, said he was going to go take it to his buddy's house. And that's all I remember. That's all I know. And, that was it. Then I forget how long. There was a period of time that went by. Then he had called me back, and then he thanked me for the information that I gave him, and but he had asked me about, when he had asked me about, or he asked me about an argument that I know of him arguing with his dad about the motorcycle. Now, some of these other stories that I've watched, they talk about him getting in an argument with his stepdad over his dogs. But like I said, from what I gathered and what he told me, I mean, and what the detective asked me if I knew if he got in an argument with the stepdad over this motorcycle. Because I don't know if when they interrogated his stepdad, he had mentioned that. They don't tell you. This isn't in any of the stories that are out there on the doc or any of these documentaries. They just say it was over his dogs. But the detective kind of believed, and so did I, from what Chris had told me, that it was over the motorcycle. Because he didn't want anyone to, or he wasn't allowed to have it, and he wanted it. And it was his money, and he bought it, and that it is what it is. I'm a teenager at that time. I don't get, I did what I tried to do what I wanted to do, and did what I wanted to do. So, I'll tell somebody what to do and not to do. But anyways, that's when he asked me about the keys and the key to the bike and how it came back to me and this, that, and the other. But then some time had passed, and like I said, I think they interrogated the stepdad. I know they did, and he denied it all. But I think when he did come out about it, it was an argument over the motorcycle, which they depicted as it was about his dogs. I don't know. I wasn't there. I couldn't tell you if it was about his dogs or if it was about the motorcycle. I couldn't tell you that. But all right, man. So I'm going to make myself small, and we're going to watch this documentary here, and then I'll be stopping when there's certain points if it portrays to me, or portrays to anything.
Some of the names have been changed. The quiet agricultural town of Salinas, California, is known for its abundant produce. A town of hard-working people, it hardly seems the place for a murder. But on January 14th, 1998, the owners of a house discovered something that would change that impression forever. Jim Olson told his wife Sandra and her sister that he discovered something strange in the crawl space under the house while installing heating ducts.
I just happened to look over and there's like a pair of shoes.
He found a pair of tennis shoes sticking out of the dirt, with the toes pointing upwards.
I'm not joking.
I want to see it.
Sure.
That's creepy.
He was too large to reach them in the cramped space. To Jim, it looked as if someone may have been buried in a shallow grave.
I just got out of there. I didn't want to see.
I want to see it. What's that?
I'm going back down there.
They all hoped it was a prank.
They're directly back there, right under the kitchen.
We can't just leave them down there. It's creepy.
Yeah, we can.
You know what? I'll go.
But Sandra volunteered to check, just to make sure.
Now, see, I just want to stop that real quick. There's some of them other stories say that there was sisters and they were like, hey, I'll pay you $20. I'll give you $20 if you go down there. You know what I mean? There's, like I said, so there's different stories about how this part came about who went down and back down in there to check out these tennis shoes that were sticking out.
Be careful. Slide over here.
See it?
Something was holding the shoes firmly in place.
It's stuck on something.
In the dim light, Sandra could see that the shoes were attached to a skeleton. Jim called 911. Officers from the Salinas Police Department responded to the call. Sergeant Miller and Detective McLaughlin were among the responding officers. Police confirmed that the bones were human, and the area was declared a crime scene.
Right, Dr. Galloway, as you can see, this is exactly how we found it.
To properly preserve the site and recover the skeletal remains, investigators called in Dr. Allison Galloway, a forensic anthropologist at the University of California, Santa Cruz campus. Remarkably, Galloway found the skeleton to be complete and undisturbed by animals. The initial examination determined that the bones were likely male and that they had been there for a number of years.
We could tell that the body had been there for quite a while. There was no odor, there was no grease in the bone, there was no soft tissue left. So we say usually that takes about 5 years minimum, but it then can go anywhere up to 50 years. So we have quite a long range. We did see a lot of exfoliation of the bone. The bone itself wasn't disintegrating, but it was in a very protected environment.
Decomposed jeans and underwear suggested the victim had been fully clothed at the time of his death and burial. As Galloway carefully sifted through the remains, she found a .38 caliber bullet. Police now believed they had uncovered a homicide. As they scoured the area around the body, they uncovered some personal items, including a set of keys and a cigarette lighter.
All right, so I'm going to back this up a little bit because I went a little bit too far. So there's the keys. I mean, this is a reenactment, obviously. I'm pretty sure because they're doing a documentary, but yeah, there's the keys there was a motorcycle key on there, and how they took that motorcycle key and was able to trace that back to me and question me about it is insane. I just don't know. You know what I mean? How they did that, especially back in those days. You know, they did have technology, but not like they do today. But yeah, so.
As they scoured the area around the body, they uncovered some personal items, including a set of keys and a cigarette lighter. Sergeant Miller of the Salinas Police Department spoke with the family that currently owned the house.
A couple of real quick questions. Just pretty much the basics as far as when did you buy the house here?
They said that they had lived there for 2.5 years.
And I got the story just real quick. Let me just run it by and see if I got everything straight.
This was the first time anyone had been in the crawl space.
Push it over.
Now, investigators had to determine who this victim was. Without the victim's identity, police would not be able to track his killer.
I was surprised at how specific they are. I mean, right. You know, this one's in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
The remains were sent to the UC Santa Cruz Anthropology Lab. There, they believed Dr. Galloway could provide vital information.
I'll get the bone board so we can do stature.
Okay. I'm going to go with the right femur.
Measurements confirmed that the remains were that of an adolescent male of European descent.
Okay, 4.
He was approximately 5 feet 10 inches tall.
Is to 5'10".
Okay.
Okay.
The bullet found among the remains indicated the victim had been shot.
The gladiolus and the xiphoid. On the sternal bodies.
To verify the cause of death, Dr. Galloway looked for any peculiarities on the bones.
Let's take a look at the skull here.
She discovered 2 gunshot holes in the victim's skull.
So, it looks like we have 2 entry wounds over here. This victim, we had a whole series of injuries. We had 2 gunshot injuries to the head, and at least 1 and possibly 2 gunshot injuries to the rest of the body. The first of the head ones came in on the right side, sort of around the ear, and probably exited through the left eye. And then the second injury came in a little bit further forward, and that moved and came out on this side over here. 2, 3, 4,
There was also evidence of at least 1 entry wound to the victim's back.
and rib 7, we also have some breaking. Perimortem, this is around death.
Dr. Galloway reported her findings to Sergeant Miller.
Okay, doctor. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
He cross-referenced the address where the victim was found with missing persons reports dating back from 5 years earlier. He came up with a promising match. A teenage boy named Chris Denoyer was reported missing from the same residence in 1984. Sergeant Miller reviewed the report. There was a picture on file, and Dr. Galloway's assessment was consistent with the missing boy's description.
Chris Denoyer was last seen January 13th, 1984, and it was his mother who had notified police that, in fact, her son was missing at that time.
Investigators obtained Chris's dental records. Dr. Kevin Landon performed the analysis. He compared the x-rays from Chris's file to slides of the victim's dental remains. He noticed something.
I found that there was a retainer, an orthodontic type retainer on the lower jaw extending from his left canine tooth to his right canine tooth with an orthodontic band around it. During the time that this individual was alive, that was a standard type of orthodontic retainer to place. Nowadays, they are made a little different, bonded in the back of the teeth so that they're not so visible.
Dr. Landon had found a positive match.
I concluded that the dental remains from this individual under the house matched the dental records that I received.
Investigators finally had a name and a face for their victim. Now they needed to find out who had murdered Chris Denoyer. But after 14 years, the killer's trail was cold. Little evidence remained. Police were uncertain they would ever solve this case.
And I believe at this point is when this detective reached out to me after they did their forensic evidence and the keys. And, at this point, being that I'm a former investigator, working cases like this, you have to wait until the forensics pathologist or whoever that's doing that's working the case. You have to wait for that forensic evidence to come back, and if it went cold and they didn't have anybody at this time, they had that motorcycle key. And that's, like I said, at the time he told me, at first he didn't tell me who or what, just about the key, and asking me, like I said, I had several motorcycles. So at this point, because later on when I had spoke with the detective had called me back, they had already, had more evidence or, of what went on.
Yeah.
Police in Salinas, California struggled to track the killer of Chris Denoyer, whose body was found 14 years after he was reported missing. A .38 caliber bullet was the only evidence the killer left behind.
Let's just check these vents out here and make sure there's...
Investigators now needed to reconstruct the events that led up to his death. First, they wanted to make sure there was no access to the crawl space from the outside of the house. They found none.
There's only one way in and one way out. So the two possible scenarios are either it's a stranger or it's somebody that lives in the residence. Now, if you try to play out the stranger scenario, you'd have to say the stranger came into the house, murdered Chris, and then hoped that they would have enough time to drag this body into their house, dig a grave, cover it over, and crawl out before anyone comes home.
And that didn't seem likely to the police.
And even this one's even covered, but in my mind, the people that were suspects in this case were anyone that had access and control to the residence in January of 1984.
And the only access was from inside.
I'm not sure.
But Sergeant Miller wanted to be certain that Chris hadn't been murdered after he went missing. He made another call to Dr. Kevin Landon.
One of the questions that Detective Andy Miller of the Salinas Police Department asked of me was that would it have been possible for Christopher to have actually run away, returned a few years later, possibly been murdered by someone and placed under the house? And I could tell him that that was impossible due to the fact that his wisdom teeth had not developed any further.
It was proof that Chris was murdered just before the missing persons report was filed.
Thank you very much.
The police report indicated that Chris had a girlfriend at the time of his disappearance. They hoped she could give some insight into the family.
So she was the first person that we decided to contact, primarily because since she didn't live in the house, she wasn't as likely in our eyes to be a suspect.
She was dismayed to hear the news of Chris's death. She stated she first met Chris Denoyer in 1983. They dated up until his disappearance in '84. Chris, she said, was her first love. When asked about Chris's relationship with his parents, she said that Chris and his stepfather, Jackson Villarta, constantly fought. Villarta was always on him about something. She said she never believed Chris ran away. He wouldn't have left without saying goodbye to her.
Hi, Mrs. Villarta. Detective Miller from Salinas PD. We talked on the phone. Thank you.
Investigators decided it was time to speak with Chris's mother.
This is about your son, Christopher Denoyer.
Have you found him?
They tracked her down at her current residence.
And I'm so
She was shocked by the news that Chris's body had been found.
It's very important that we begin our investigation and try to find
On the day Chris disappeared, she was at work. Her husband, Jackson Villarta, called her and told her that Chris had run away.
Team, and he had a lot of great friends.
She had been convinced he was still alive. In fact, they had received a telegram from him a few days after he disappeared.
It's a mail.
Chris, she said, was an average teenager, but they had their problems with him.
It says here.
He and his sister were having trouble adjusting to life with her new husband, Jackson Villarta. Investigators asked if anyone in the family owned a gun. She said that Jackson Villarta had one for home security, but she didn't know the kind. Miller didn't believe that Chris's mother had anything to do with the murder.
At the time of this murder, Chris's mother was pregnant, and she's a heavy-set woman to begin with. So the idea of her going through this very small crawl space and digging, a 6-foot trench under her house and dragging a 180-pound victim under there, that's pretty much out of the question.
But they did have a suspect in mind. Chris's stepfather, Jackson Villarta.
Specific there, right. And you can see from this crime scene sketch here that this body. We felt that the only person that could possibly benefit from burying a body underneath a residence was the person who was in control of that residence, and in this case, that's Jackson Villarta.
Villarta worked for the telephone company. They found him on his route. As investigators approached, they noticed he had the right size and build to dig the 6-foot trench in the crawl space.
We're from Salinas PD.
Mr. Villarta, I already talked to your supervisor.
He agreed to accompany them in for questioning.
He came down.
He was cooperative and admitted that he and Chris had had their troubles. But he said that was normal. Teenagers often have conflicts with their step-parents.
One other thing I'd like to explain to you. A lot of times when people come down to the police department.
Villarta said he worked from noon to 8 p.m. on the day Chris disappeared. When he got home, his wife told him that Chris had run away.
This is Detective Miller.
Co-pilot.
His story contradicted what his wife had told investigators earlier.
Rifle. Anything else?
Yes, well, I came home.
A few days later, he said, they received a mailgram from Chris saying he was sorry for all the trouble he had caused and that he had moved out. Investigators were suspicious. Villarta admitted that he had 2 guns, a .22 caliber rifle and a .38 caliber revolver. The caliber of the handgun interested Sergeant Miller.
The rounds we'd found in the grave, that Chris had been murdered with a .38 caliber weapon. So it was a very significant piece of information.
The police needed to get a search warrant to examine the revolver.
I just want to stop because they really lucked out that this guy was such an idiot and so arrogant that he thought that he could get away with it and still keep the weapon that he used to murder Chris with, and that it would never be, he still had it. Like they would never know that this was never going to get found out. That's crazy. It gets crazier.
They went to Villarta's house to prevent him from entering and removing the handgun. With a warrant in hand, police searched the home where Villarta now lived. They collected the .38 caliber revolver and some ammunition.
I hear that his birthplace is LA. I don't know.
While they waited for the ballistics testing to be completed, they checked out Villarta's story. They secured all of his personal records for January of 1984.
So we've got to look at this. We've got a call.
There was one small detail that piqued their interest.
We've got a call at 1. Look at this. Hey, Bob. Yeah. Come here and take a look at this.
The mailgram that was supposedly sent by Chris 3 days after he disappeared was ordered from and billed to Villarta's home phone.
So this is dynamite. Right. But we've got to find
Chris had already been murdered.
Was calling these numbers.
Police knew that Villarta had written it.
So there was definitely somebody home. The one sentence in the mailgram that completely gave it away that Jackson was the author was when the statement was that in some ways Jackson was right. And you're talking about a 16-year-old kid who hated his stepfather. Is he going to write in this letter that he thinks that his stepfather was right? The only person that would write that was Jackson. So the whole idea of the mailgram right from the beginning was preposterous. 84.
The circumstantial evidence against Jackson Villarta was mounting.
The house on Navajo Drive.
But investigators would need one more piece of evidence to make an arrest. Detectives in Salinas, California had identified Jackson Villarta as the prime suspect in the murder of his teenage stepson, Chris Denoyer. But they still needed physical evidence to link him to the scene of the crime. A .38 caliber revolver and ammunition were collected during a search of his house. Scott Armstrong, senior criminalist with the California State Department of Justice, examined the gun. He fired the weapon into a water tank. And collected the spent bullets.
The gun, whether it's a revolver or a pistol, will have two kinds of markings that they impress on the bullet: class characteristics and individual characteristics. The class characteristics would be things that would be common to all guns of that make and manufacture.
The individual characteristics are unique markings called lands and grooves, which are left on a bullet as it travels through the gun barrel. They are as individual as fingerprints. Using a comparison microscope, he compared the bullets from the crime scene to the bullets fired from Villarta's weapon side by side. The bullets matched.
There were class markings and individual markings that were sufficient that I could identify the bullet as having been fired from the revolver.
It was the hard evidence investigators needed.
Mr. Villarta, with your left hand, slowly reach out and open the door from the outside. Slowly step out of the vehicle and face away from me. Take 2 steps to your left. Stop. Put your hands behind your back and interlace your fingers. Get down on your knees.
On February 6, 1999, Jackson Villarta was arrested for the murder of Chris Denoyer 15 years earlier. Under questioning, he denied all charges and maintained his innocence. At trial, investigators presented a videotape that proved it wasn't likely an outsider broke into the home, killed Chris, and then buried him in the crawl space. An officer matching Villarta's physical description dug a hole in the confined area. The experiment was timed. It took a little over an hour.
So getting back to the fact that if an outsider had come into this place, done the murder, and decided this was how he was going to dispose of the body, he would have had to commit himself to a minimum of 1 hour in sort of the danger zone, because if someone had come home while he was there, they would have been discovered.
Chris, you will!
Based on the evidence, investigators believe Jackson Villarta and Chris argued that day.
You're going to give me that respect.
I'm not getting your respect.
Yes, you are.
You're not my father.
You're going to give me that respect. Like it or not.
In a rage, Villarta grabbed his .38 caliber gun and shot Chris twice in the head and once in the chest. Then he hid his body in the crawl space under the house. On February 1st, 2000, Jackson Villarta was convicted of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 17 years to life. Jackson Villarta thought that burying his victim under the house would permanently conceal the evidence of his crime.
All right, guys, that's it. That's crazy, isn't it? I do know the first trial is, I like I said, we weren't hangout buddies every single day, but we were friends, and I didn't know about, I never had met his stepdad. I didn't know the whole story about how bad it was, but man, for him to do what he did, that's horrible. He was a good dude. He was a good guy, and he definitely didn't deserve any of that for whatever happened, for whatever argument or disrespect. But I know it's been a long time. And if any of the family out there is still out there, I give my condolences to the family, because, like I said, I knew Chris. He was a friend. He wasn't like my best friend, but he was a friend, and it was a crazy situation from a motorcycle key. But they never really get into what the argument's about. The other stories that I watched, they talk about a dog. They speculate things, but this detective, I'm assuming that's who I had spoke to. I don't know which the detective was, but I'm guessing it was him. It was the one in the documentary there. And he had hinted towards the motorcycle thing. That's why he even contacted me, was, well, they one the key, 2, no motorcycle found, 3, it was still in my name and was never transferred. And what did I know about Chris? How did I know Chris? What did I know anything about anything? But I gave her everything I could tell. But this is a sad situation, man, for something like that. And then for the family to be living, his mom, his sister, I think he had, like I said, 1 or 2 sisters, maybe 3. I don't know I can't remember how many siblings. Like I said, we're talking 40 years ago. I don't remember everything sibling wise, but they lived in that house. His mom thought this whole time he was missing, and he was right underneath the house dead. His stepdad had shot and killed him. That's crazy. And I know it at some of the other videos I watched, they talked about the smell, because that was the first thing I thought of. I was like, no, underneath the house, how did nobody not smell it, And his excuse was, he said the stepdad had said that I guess, I don't know, Chris or somebody had a pet snake, or they had pet snakes or something. I don't know nothing about that, because like I said, I'd never really been in his house or anything like that. But told the family that there were pet snake got out, and it must be under the house and died, and that's what the smell was. But man, I couldn't imagine, because that smells horrendous, And the fact that they lived up until, what was it, 2 years or 2.5 years before they found his body. So they had lived there for like 12 years or something, 10 or 12, 10 years. Something like that, yeah. 10 years they lived there, and the whole time they thought he was missing, and he was right underneath the house, man. It's a sad situation. And it was a story, like I said, that, I always remember, and I told, people about it. It's like, dude, you'll never believe this shit, man. I sold the motorcycle to this kid I knew, and, and I told him the story that detective told me. I could only speak on what I was, told. I can't speak on anything else. I can go by what this, obviously they're telling their story. The detective is on what happened and everything. I don't know anything other than what I'm telling you, but that's how I was involved in that situation. Anyways, I hope you guys liked that. I hope you are, enjoyed the documentary part. Not I mean, it's a sad situation. All this stuff, you know, these are personal stories. And, you know, I'm a former investigator where I investigated homicide cases, which I did a 3-part series of my first 48 on one of the homicide cases that I was involved in, it, which was a double homicide case. But man, it's crazy, you know, the way things work. But all right, guys, I got more stories, stories I did, investigations I did, homicide investigations I've done. And I'm sure I got more life stories, personal stories. Like that's the second personal story I've shared that I dealt with. And I mean, I wasn't so involved in that one as I was with my cousin. That was crazy. Anyways, guys, thanks for stopping by. Appreciate all the support. Again, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. Hit that notification bell to all. Hey, and don't forget, Wednesday night, I'll be doing another live and a giveaway. Like I did, I think it was Saturday night. It was Saturday night. I did a live and a giveaway. So stay tuned. Look for that notification and get you some merch. All right, man. We'll talk to you guys soon. See you on the next video. Peace.